The days were long, and the routine of everyday life had become almost second nature to Alex and Ryan. They had been roommates for just over 6 months, sharing the rent of a small but comfortable two-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city. It was an arrangement that had worked out well from the beginning. Ryan was easygoing, and Alex was organized, making them a perfect balance of opposites. They never had serious arguments, and on most evenings, they'd find themselves on the couch together, watching movies, playing video games, or chatting about life. But recently, something had shifted, and Alex couldn't quite put his finger on when it had started. It wasn't like he hadn't noticed Ryan before. How could he not? Ryan was tall, athletic, and effortlessly charismatic. He had an easy charm that people were drawn to, including Alex, though in the past it had always been in a platonic way. At least that's what Alex told himself. The truth was that Alex had always admired Ryan, but now it was different. That admiration had begun to stir something deeper, something more intense, and it made Alex uncomfortable. It started with subtle things. Things Alex could have easily dismissed as just the result of spending too much time together in close quarters. He started noticing the way Ryan laughed a little longer at his jokes, the way their conversations became more personal, more intimate. There was also the way Ryan seemed to sit closer than before when they were on the couch, their legs brushing, which sent a strange thrill through Alex's body. He had always been into women, had dated several over the years, but this was the first time he had ever felt something like this for a guy. It wasn't just any guy either. It was Ryan, his roommate, his friend. Alex felt a constant pull, an attraction that confused and unsettled him. Every time he tried to push the thoughts away, they only seemed to grow stronger. One particular night, as they lounged on the couch after a long day, Alex found himself hyper-aware of Ryan's presence. They were watching some mindless action movie, but Alex couldn't focus on it. Instead, his attention kept drifting to Ryan. How relaxed he seemed, how effortlessly handsome he looked, even in a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. His broad shoulders filled out his shirt, and his biceps flexed slightly every time he shifted in his seat. Alex swallowed, his heart beating a little faster than usual. Ryan, oblivious to Alex's internal struggle, leaned back, stretching his arms over his head and letting out a satisfied sigh. "Man, I needed this," he said, glancing at Alex with a lazy smile. "Work's been killing me." Alex nodded, barely processing what Ryan had said. He managed a weak smile. "Yeah, I know what you mean." But the truth was, Alex wasn't thinking about work at all. His mind was racing with thoughts he wasn't ready to face. He felt the tension building between them, and it wasn't just in his head. He could feel it. Thick in the air, making every breath he took feel heavier. He needed to snap out of it, to get his mind off Ryan and back to reality. But every time he tried, his thoughts only spiraled further. He stole another glance at Ryan, who was now focused on the TV, his eyes half closed in relaxation. There was something about the way he looked so comfortable, so at ease, that made Alex's heart flutter. He couldn't deny it any longer. He was attracted to Ryan, and not in a casual, "my friend's a good-looking guy" way. This was different. This was something he couldn't control, and that scared him. Alex shifted in his seat, trying to make sense of it all. How could this be happening? He had never thought about guys like this before, and now, out of nowhere, he was feeling things he had never felt. Was it just because they had gotten close as friends? Was it the result of spending too much time together? He didn't know, and he hated that he couldn't explain it. What he did know was that the more he tried to fight it, the more intense his feelings became. The movie droned on, but Alex wasn't paying attention anymore. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Ryan, thoughts he didn't want to admit to. He kept his eyes on the screen, trying to ignore the way his heart sped up every time Ryan shifted beside him. But then it happened. Ryan's hand brushed against Alex's leg, a brief, innocent touch. But it sent a surge of electricity through Alex's body. He froze, every muscle tensing, and for a split second, he thought he saw Ryan glance at him out of the corner of his eye, but he couldn't be sure. It was a small, fleeting moment, but it was enough to send Alex's thoughts spiraling. His chest tightened, and he could feel the blood rushing to his face, the heat rising in his neck. What the hell was happening to him? He couldn't be feeling this way. Not about Ryan. It was wrong, wasn't it? They were just friends, roommates. This was a line he couldn't cross. But the more Alex tried to convince himself that it was wrong, the more he realized how badly he wanted it. The rest of the night passed in a blur, and by the time Ryan said goodnight and disappeared into his room, Alex was left alone with his thoughts. He sat on the couch long after the movie had ended, staring at the blank screen, his mind racing with 1,000 conflicting emotions. He couldn't deny it anymore. The attraction he felt for Ryan was real, and it wasn't going away. Alex lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He could hear Ryan moving around in the other room, the sound of him getting ready for bed. The soft creak of his door closing sent a wave of anxiety and anticipation through Alex. He felt like he was on the verge of something big, something that could change everything. As the night wore on, Alex's mind kept replaying the events of the evening. The way Ryan's hand had brushed against his leg, the way their conversations had become more intimate, more personal lately. Had Ryan noticed the change too? Was it all in Alex's head, or was there something there? Something neither of them was willing to acknowledge yet. The thought of Ryan lying in the room next to his made Alex's heart race. He could picture him there, stretched out on his bed, shirtless, his strong chest rising and falling with each breath. The image sent a thrill through Alex, and he hated how much he wanted it to be real. But it wasn't just about physical attraction. It was more than that. There was something about Ryan, something about the way he made Alex feel. Safe, comfortable, understood. It was a feeling Alex had never had with anyone before, and it scared him because it was so unfamiliar. Alex turned onto his side, staring at the wall that separated their rooms. He couldn't keep pretending that this wasn't happening. He couldn't keep pushing these feelings down. He needed to talk to Ryan, to figure out what the hell was going on between them. But the thought of that conversation terrified him. What if he was wrong? What if Ryan didn't feel the same way? What if Alex ruined everything? The uncertainty gnawed at him, keeping him awake long into the night. He wanted to believe that he was imagining things, that he could just forget about it and things would go back to normal. But deep down, he knew that wasn't possible. Whatever this was, this unexpected attraction, it was real. And there was no going back. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Alex finally closed his eyes, though his mind was far from at ease. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in the apartment had been building for weeks, an unspoken energy that neither Alex nor Ryan could ignore anymore. It was always there, simmering just beneath the surface, creating an invisible line between them that neither of them dared to cross until that night. It was a Friday evening, and the usual routine was in full swing. They had both come home from work exhausted but looking forward to unwinding together. As they often did, they ordered takeout, cracked open a couple of beers, and settled into the worn couch in front of the TV. The movie playing was just background noise, something to fill the space between their conversations. But tonight, something was different. Alex could feel it immediately. The way Ryan had been looking at him, his usual teasing smile carrying something more, something deeper. Alex wasn't sure if it was the couple of beers they'd had, or if they had simply reached a point where the tension between them could no longer be ignored. But there was a shift in the air, and Alex felt himself teetering on the edge of something he wasn't sure he was ready for. Ryan leaned back, resting his arm on the back of the couch, his gaze settling on Alex. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his voice low, almost a murmur. "Everything okay?" Alex shifted, trying to play it off, though his heart was pounding in his chest. He could feel the heat rising in his face, the tension in his muscles. He hadn't expected Ryan to notice how distracted he'd been. But of course, Ryan had always been able to read him too well. "Yeah, I'm fine," Alex lied, though his voice sounded shaky even to his own ears. He avoided Ryan's gaze, focusing on the half-empty beer bottle in his hand instead. He wasn't fine. Not at all. The thoughts that had been swirling in his head for days, weeks now, were too much, and he could feel the weight of them pressing down on him, suffocating him. Ryan didn't say anything for a moment, and Alex could feel the silence stretching between them, thick with everything they weren't saying. He glanced over, catching Ryan's eyes for just a second, but that was all it took. There was something in Ryan's gaze, something intense, something vulnerable. that made Alex's breath hitch. Ryan shifted closer, his knee brushing against Alex's, and Alex's heart nearly stopped. It was a simple touch, an innocent one, but it sent a shock of electricity through him. His skin burned where they made contact, and he could feel the air between them growing heavier, charged with a tension that had been simmering for too long. Alex, Ryan said quietly, his voice suddenly serious, cutting through the stillness of the room. Alex's name hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything they weren't saying. Alex turned to look at him, and the look in Ryan's eyes, the way his dark gaze was fixed on him, intense and unyielding, made it impossible for him to breathe. He knew in that moment that the line they'd been skirting around for weeks was right there in front of them, and all it would take was one small step to cross it. Ryan didn't move, but his eyes spoke volumes. They were asking questions, waiting for answers that Alex wasn't sure he had. And yet, despite the confusion swirling in his mind, despite the fear that gripped him, he couldn't look away. The silence between them was deafening, and Alex felt like the walls were closing in. His throat was dry, his palms sweaty, and he could feel his pulse racing in his ears. He wanted to say something, to break the tension, to stop whatever was happening before it went too far. But instead, he sat there frozen, caught in the pull of Ryan's gaze. And then, as if in slow motion, Ryan's hand moved. It wasn't much, just a small shift, his fingers brushing against Alex's leg. But the touch was enough to send a shiver down Alex's spine, and suddenly he couldn't think straight. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, emotions he couldn't sort out. All he knew was that he didn't want Ryan to stop. Alex swallowed hard, his mouth dry. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and yet every nerve in his body was screaming at him to move, to do something, anything. But he couldn't. He was paralyzed, caught between the fear of crossing that line and the undeniable desire pulling him toward it. Ryan leaned in, closer than he had ever been before, and Alex's heart hammered in his chest. He could feel the heat of Ryan's breath on his skin, could see the way Ryan's lips parted slightly, as if he were about to say something, but no words came. Instead, they just sat there, inches apart, the tension between them so thick it was almost suffocating. And then, without warning, Ryan's lips were on his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like Ryan wasn't sure if Alex would push him away. But when Alex didn't pull back, when he didn't stop him, Ryan deepened the kiss, his hand sliding up to cup the back of Alex's neck. The moment their lips met, something inside Alex broke free. All the tension, all the confusion, all the unspoken feelings that had been building between them for weeks came crashing down in that single moment, and Alex kissed him back. The kiss was everything. Every bit of frustration, every bit of desire, every bit of confusion poured into one electric, breathless moment. Alex's mind was spinning, but his body seemed to know exactly what to do. His hands gripped Ryan's shirt, pulling him closer, desperate to close the space between them. It felt like a dam had broken, like everything they had been holding back was finally pouring out, and there was no stopping it now. For a moment, nothing else mattered. It was just them, just this kiss, this overwhelming connection that had been building between them for so long. Alex couldn't think, couldn't breathe, but he didn't care. All that mattered was Ryan, his touch, his warmth, the way his lips moved against Alex, the way their bodies seemed to fit together like they were always meant to. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other's, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. Alex's heart was pounding, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. And yet, for the first time in weeks, he felt a strange sense of calm. Ryan's hand stayed on the back of Alex's neck, his thumb brushing lightly against his skin. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. The look in his eyes, the same intense, vulnerable look Alex had seen earlier, said it all. They had crossed the line, and there was no going back. Alex's chest tightened, a mixture of fear and excitement swirling inside him. He didn't know what came next, didn't know how they were supposed to move forward from this. But as he looked into Ryan's eyes, he realized that, for once, he didn't need to have all the answers. They had crossed the line together, and somehow, that made it feel a little less terrifying. The atmosphere in the room was thick with unspoken tension, a weight that had been growing between them for what felt like months. It had started with stolen glances, moments of awkward laughter, and the way their conversations had grown deeper, more intimate, as if they were dancing around something neither of them had the courage to confront. But now the silence between them was louder than any words could be, and it was undeniable that something was about to happen. It was a quiet evening in their shared apartment, just the two of them alone again. Alex had been avoiding looking directly at Ryan, his nerves on edge, his heart beating a little faster than normal. They were watching a movie, something neither of them were paying attention to, the dialogue blending into the background, irrelevant to the moment. Alex could feel Ryan sitting beside him, closer than usual, their knees occasionally brushing against each other. Every time their legs touched, a jolt of electricity shot through Alex's body, making it impossible to focus on anything else. He shifted on the couch, trying to shake off the rising tension. He told himself it was all in his head. He'd always been close with Ryan. Since they had moved in together, their friendship had grown naturally, comfortable in a way that didn't require much thought. They spent hours talking about everything from work to their favorite bands, staying up late into the night with beers in hand, laughing about stupid jokes only they would understand. But recently, something had shifted. Alex wasn't sure when or why, but it was impossible to ignore. Ryan, with his relaxed confidence, had always been the easygoing one, the one who kept things light. But lately, his teasing had felt different, his jokes lingering on Alex a little too long, his touches too deliberate, and there was that look in his eyes, intense, searching, as if Ryan was waiting for Alex to make the first move to acknowledge what was growing between them. Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry as the silence grew heavier. The movie droned on in the background, but neither of them was paying attention anymore. Alex could feel Ryan looking at him, could sense the shift in the air, and it was too much. He couldn't stand it anymore. He turned to look at Ryan, intending to say something to break the awkwardness, but the words caught in his throat when he saw the expression on Ryan's face. Ryan was watching him, his gaze steady, his eyes dark and unreadable. There was a tension in his jaw, a subtle tightening that Alex had never noticed before, and the way Ryan was looking at him, like he was waiting, like he already knew what was about to happen, sent Alex's heart into a spiral. "Alex," Ryan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of it was undeniable. Alex felt his pulse quicken, his palms beginning to sweat. Ryan's voice, usually so casual, now carried a seriousness that Alex wasn't prepared for. It made him feel exposed, vulnerable, like Ryan could see right through him, straight to the feelings he had been trying so hard to bury. He swallowed again, forcing himself to respond. "Yeah." His voice sounded hoarse, uncertain, and it made him cringe. But Ryan didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. Ryan shifted, turning his body slightly so that he was facing Alex fully now. Their knees were touching, and Alex couldn't ignore the warmth of Ryan's leg pressed against his. Ryan's hand moved, resting on the couch between them, his fingers so close that Alex could feel the heat radiating from. "You've been distant lately," Ryan said, his eyes still locked on Alex's, searching for something Alex wasn't sure he was ready to give. "Is everything okay?" Alex's heart pounded in his chest. Distant. He hadn't meant to be. If anything, he had been trying to stay as close as possible without crossing the invisible line that had formed between them. But now, with Ryan's eyes on him, that line was beginning to blur, and Alex wasn't sure if he could keep pretending anymore. Alex started, his voice faltering. He didn't know how to explain it, how to say what had been eating away at him for weeks without sounding like an idiot or worse, scaring Ryan off completely. But Ryan's gaze never wavered, and Alex could feel the heat between them growing, the tension becoming unbearable. "I don't know," Alex finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something's been different. I just don't know what to do about it." Ryan's eyes softened slightly, his hand inching just a little closer to Alex's on the couch. Alex's breath caught in his throat, his heart thudding loudly in his chest. He could feel his pulse racing, the room suddenly too small, too warm. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ryan asked, his voice gentle, careful. But there was something else in his tone, something that told Alex Ryan already knew what he was talking about, that he was just waiting for Alex to admit it. Alex's hands shook, his nerves buzzing with anticipation and fear. He'd been fighting this for so long, trying to convince himself that whatever he was feeling was just confusion, a passing thought. But as he sat there, inches away from Ryan, his heart pounding and his mind spinning, he realized there was no escaping it anymore. "I don't know how to," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't even know what this is." Ryan's hand moved then, slowly, deliberately. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against Alex's, and the touch sent a shiver down Alex's spine. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like everything. Alex's breath hitched, his eyes widening as Ryan's fingers laced with his, their hands resting together between them. Ryan leaned in slightly, his gaze never leaving Alex's. "It doesn't have to be complicated," he murmured, his voice low, soothing. "We don't have to figure it all out right now." Alex's chest tightened, the air around them growing thick with anticipation. He wanted to say something, to ask what Ryan meant, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was sit there, frozen, as Ryan's hand tightened around his, their fingers intertwined. And then, before Alex could process what was happening, Ryan leaned in closer, closing the small gap between them. His breath was warm against Alex's skin, and Alex's heart raced as Ryan's lips hovered just inches from his. The world seemed to stop, everything around them fading into the background until all that was left was the two of them, the weight of their unspoken feelings pressing down on them. Alex didn't move, didn't breathe, as Ryan's lips finally brushed against his. The kiss was soft, hesitant, like Ryan was testing the waters, waiting to see if Alex would pull away. But Alex didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into it, his lips parting slightly, his heart pounding in his chest. The kiss deepened, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. The tension, the confusion, the unspoken feelings, they all made sense now. This was what they had been dancing around for weeks, maybe even months. And now that they had finally crossed that line, there was no going back. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other's. Alex's mind was spinning, his heart still racing. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like everything was clear. Ryan smiled, his hand still holding Alex's tightly. "See?" he whispered, his voice soft but steady. "That wasn't so hard." Alex let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over him like a wave. "No," he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't." They sat there for a moment, their hands still intertwined, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. It wasn't complicated anymore. It was simple, and it was real. The dim glow of the moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the room. Everything about this moment felt surreal, like Alex was suspended in a dream where time had slowed, and all the tension that had been building for weeks was finally on the verge of breaking. The quiet between him and Ryan was palpable, not uncomfortable, but charged with an intensity that neither of them could ignore any longer. They had spent the entire evening together, just like many nights before, sharing dinner, watching a movie, talking about nothing and everything. But this time, something had changed. It was in the way Ryan looked at him, the way their casual touches lingered a little too long, and the heat between them had become undeniable. Alex could feel his heart racing, his pulse quickening every time their eyes met. And he knew tonight would be different. They were sitting on the couch, a movie playing in the background that neither of them was paying attention to. Alex could feel the warmth of Ryan's body next to his, and his mind was spinning with anticipation and a nervous excitement he hadn't felt before. He turned his head slightly, catching Ryan watching him, his gaze intense, filled with something deeper, something Alex had been trying to avoid for too long. Without thinking, Alex leaned in closer, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know how to explain the pull he felt toward Ryan, but it was impossible to resist. Ryan didn't move, didn't break the tension. Instead, he leaned in too, their faces just inches apart now, the air between them thick. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as their lips met, soft at first, tentative, as if testing the waters. But the moment their mouths touched, it was like a spark ignited between them, and the kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more desperate. Alex could feel Ryan's hands sliding up his arms, pulling him closer, and a low, breathless sound escaped from his throat as the world around them seemed to disappear. The kiss wasn't just physical. It was the culmination of weeks of tension, of unspoken feelings, of moments where both of them had stopped, just short of admitting what was happening between them. And now there was no more pretending, no more holding back. Ryan's hands moved to Alex's waist, pulling him closer until their bodies were pressed together, the heat between them growing with every second. Alex's hands found their way to Ryan's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, the warmth of his skin beneath his shirt. It was like everything they had been avoiding was now pouring out, raw and unrestrained. They broke the kiss just long enough to catch their breath, their foreheads resting against each other, eyes closed, as if savoring the moment. Alex's mind was a blur, a mix of nerves and desire that left him breathless. He opened his eyes and found Ryan staring at him, his expression filled with the same intensity that was burning through Alex. Ryan smiled softly, his voice low and rough. "You okay?" Alex nodded, not trusting his voice, his heart still pounding in his chest. He was more than okay. He was overwhelmed, caught in a whirlwind of emotions that he didn't quite know how to handle. But he didn't want it to stop. Not now. Ryan's hand slid under Alex's shirt, the touch of his fingers against his skin sending a shiver down Alex's spine. It was such a simple gesture, but it was filled with so much meaning. There was no turning back now, no going back to the way things were. This was real, and it was happening. Alex didn't hesitate. He leaned in again, capturing Ryan's lips in another kiss, this one deeper, more intense than before. Their movements became more frantic, more desperate, as they tugged at each other's clothes, hands exploring each other's bodies with a hunger that had been building for far too long. The sound of their breathing filled the room, heavy and uneven, as they stumbled toward the bedroom, barely breaking the kiss as they moved. By the time they reached the bed, their clothes were a mess, scattered across the floor, and the heat between them was undeniable. Ryan gently pushed Alex onto the bed, his weight settling over him, and Alex's breath hitched as their bodies pressed together, skin against skin. Every touch, every kiss sent a rush of sensation through Alex's body, making him feel like he was on fire, like he couldn't get close enough to Ryan no matter how hard he tried. They moved together in perfect sync, every touch, every kiss a silent conversation, a way of expressing everything they hadn't been able to put into words. Alex's hands roamed over Ryan's back, pulling him closer, needing to feel him, needing to be consumed by the moment. And Ryan was everywhere, his lips, his hands, his breath against Alex's neck, sending shivers down his spine, making it impossible to think about anything other than the way he was making him feel. Alex had never experienced anything like this before. So raw, so intense, like the rest of the world had faded away, and all that mattered was the two of them. Time seemed to blur, each moment blending into the next as they lost themselves in each other. It wasn't just about the physical connection. It was about the emotional release, the culmination of everything they had been holding back for so long. When it was over, they lay together in the quiet, their breaths slowly evening out, the heat of their bodies still lingering in the air. Alex rested his head against Ryan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, his mind spinning with everything that had just happened. He felt Ryan's hand gently brush through his hair, a soft, comforting gesture that made Alex feel grounded, safe. He closed his eyes, letting the calm of the moment wash over him. For the first time in weeks, the tension that had been building between them was gone, replaced by something deeper, something that felt real and right. Ryan's voice broke the silence, soft and full of affection. "Are you okay?" Alex smiled against Ryan's chest, his heart swelling with a warmth he hadn't expected. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'm okay." And for the first time, he meant it. There was no more pretending, no more holding back. Whatever had just happened between them, it wasn't something he could ignore anymore. It was real, and he was ready to see where it would lead. The soft light of the early morning filtered through the curtains, casting a warm, golden hue across the room. Alex stirred, slowly waking as the weight of reality began to settle over him. His body felt heavy, as if the night before had drained every ounce of energy from him. Yet a warmth lingered, a pleasant, unfamiliar warmth that spread through him like a slow-burning fire. He blinked his eyes open, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The room felt familiar but different, the usual order of things slightly askew. The scattered clothes on the floor, the faint scent of Ryan still lingering in the sheets. It all came rushing back to him. Ryan, the memory of the previous night hit him like a tidal wave. The intensity of their kiss, the way their bodies had moved together, the heat that had simmered between them until it finally boiled over. It was real. It had happened. He wasn't dreaming. For a moment, Alex lay still, staring at the ceiling as he tried to process it all. His heart was still racing, a mixture of excitement and nervousness filling his chest. He wasn't sure what this meant, what was supposed to happen next, or how to navigate the shift that had occurred between them. But as his gaze drifted over to the other side of the bed, he felt a small wave of relief. Ryan was still there, lying beside him, his face relaxed in peaceful sleep. He looked different like this, calm, vulnerable even, without the usual guarded expression he often wore. It was strange to see him like this, so close, so real. Alex let out a quiet breath, not wanting to wake him, though he couldn't help but reach out, brushing a strand of hair from Ryan's forehead. His fingers lingered for a moment, tracing the lines of his jaw before pulling back, his heart skipping a beat at the intimate gesture. The quiet of the morning was almost too much. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, but it was filled with the weight of unspoken questions. What happens now? Was this just a one-time thing? Could they even go back to the way things were? The answers didn't come easily, and Alex's mind began to swirl with uncertainty. He wasn't used to feeling this out of control. The previous night had been a whirlwind of emotions and sensations, but now, in the stillness of the morning, doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. He slowly slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Ryan, and pulled on a pair of sweatpants before quietly leaving the bedroom. His feet patted softly against the wooden floor as he made his way to the kitchen, the early morning light casting long shadows across the apartment. Alex leaned against the counter, rubbing his hands over his face as he tried to make sense of everything. The apartment felt too quiet, too still, like the calm before a storm. His heart was still racing, the weight of the previous night hanging heavy in his chest. He couldn't escape the flood of emotions swirling inside him. Excitement, fear, confusion, and a flicker of something else he couldn't quite name. He grabbed a glass of water, taking a slow sip as he stared out of the kitchen window. The city was waking up, the distant sounds of traffic and life beginning to stir outside. It felt strange to know that the world was carrying on as usual while everything in his world had shifted. The soft sound of footsteps behind him pulled Alex from his thoughts, and he turned to see Ryan standing in the doorway, his hair a mess and his eyes still heavy with sleep. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension from the previous night lingering between them like a thick fog. "Morning," Ryan said quietly, his voice rough from sleep. "Morning," Alex replied, his own voice softer than he expected. Ryan took a hesitant step forward, his eyes searching Alex's face as if trying to gauge what he was feeling. There was an uncertainty in his expression that mirrored Alex's own. The air between them felt charged, like they were both waiting for the other to make the first move. Alex swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. He had always been good at keeping his emotions in check, at staying in control. But now, standing here with Ryan, he felt exposed in a way he wasn't prepared for. Ryan broke the silence first. "Are you okay?" The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning. It wasn't just about the physical. It was about everything that had shifted between them. The unspoken questions that neither of them knew how to answer. Alex hesitated, his throat tight as he tried to find the right words. I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this is, Ryan. I don't know what happens next." Ryan nodded slowly, his expression softening. He stepped closer, his presence grounding in a way that made Alex's heart ache. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," Ryan said quietly, his voice steady but filled with understanding. "Let's just take it slow." Alex looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all he saw was calm reassurance. Ryan was always the steady one, the one who knew how to navigate even the most difficult situations with ease. But this was different. There was no map for where they were headed. "But what if?" Alex started, but Ryan cut him off gently. "We'll figure it out," Ryan said, his voice firm but soft. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." There was something in the way Ryan said those words that made Alex's chest tighten with emotion. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them right now. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt like he didn't have to carry everything on his own. Ryan was there with him in this. He's the quiet stretch between them again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It felt like a shared understanding, a quiet promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. Ryan reached out, his hand brushing against Alex's arm, and that simple touch sent a wave of warmth through him. It was a reminder that last night hadn't been a mistake, that whatever had happened between them was real, and it wasn't something either of them could take back. Alex let out a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding and nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice steadier now. "One step at a time." Ryan smiled, and the tension that had been lingering between them seemed to dissolve. They didn't have to figure everything out right now. All that mattered was that they were in this together, whatever this was. They stood there for a moment, the weight of the morning lifting, just enough to let a sense of peace settle over them. Alex wasn't sure what the future held, but as he looked at Ryan, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. For now, that was enough. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the room. The city outside was slowly waking, but inside the quiet apartment, everything felt still, as if the world had paused to give Alex and Ryan a moment of peace. Alex stood by the window, staring out at the sun as it rose, his thoughts tangled in the events of the past few days. Everything had changed. Just a few days ago, his life had felt predictable. He had known where he stood with Ryan, known the boundaries of their friendship. They were roommates, friends, nothing more. But that night, the one that had started so innocently, had shifted everything. It had begun with a kiss, but what had followed was something much deeper, something neither of them had been prepared for. Alex turned away from the window and glanced back at the bed where Ryan still slept, his chest rising and falling with the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. Seeing him like that, so calm and peaceful, made Alex's heart ache in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't used to feeling this way, wasn't used to letting anyone in so deeply. But Ryan had a way of slipping past his defenses without even trying. The room was filled with the soft, comforting quiet of early morning. The air still carried the faint scent of last night, warmth, closeness, and something more. Alex ran a hand through his hair, letting out a long breath as he tried to make sense of the swirling emotions inside him. There had always been a connection between them, something he had been too afraid to admit. But now, it was out in the open, and there was no going back. He wasn't sure what came next. They had crossed a line, and the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for months had finally spilled over. It was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. But with the excitement came fear. How could they move forward from this? What did it mean for their friendship? For them? Ryan stirred in bed, his eyes fluttering open as the sunlight spilled across his face. He blinked, his gaze finding Alex almost immediately. A soft smile tugged at his lips, and Alex felt something warm bloom in his chest. "Morning," Ryan murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," Alex replied, his own voice quiet but steady. For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of what had happened hung between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with possibility, with the uncertainty of what was to come. Alex felt his pulse quicken, a mixture of nervousness and hope twisting in his stomach. Ryan shifted, sitting up slightly in bed, his hair a mess and his eyes still sleepy but focused on Alex. "You okay?" he asked, his tone gentle. Alex nodded, though he wasn't sure if okay was the right word. There was a lot to process, a lot to figure out. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he had to face it alone. He wasn't sure what their new dynamic would look like, but something about Ryan's presence made the uncertainty easier to bear. "Yeah," Alex said after a moment, his voice soft. "I think I'm okay. Just a lot to think about." Ryan nodded, understanding in his eyes as he pushed the covers aside and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. He stood up, stretching slightly before walking over to where Alex stood by the window. He stopped just in front of him, close enough that Alex could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "I get it," Ryan said quietly, his gaze searching Alex's face. "This is new for me too. I don't know what happens next, but I'm here. We'll figure it out." Alex looked up at him, his heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper, something he was still trying to name. He had been so caught up in the confusion, and the fear that he hadn't taken the time to appreciate the simplicity of Ryan's presence, the way he always seemed to ground him, no matter what chaos was unfolding around them. Together? Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the word carrying all the weight of the question that had been haunting him. Ryan's smile widened, a soft, reassuring expression that made Alex's chest tighten in the best way possible. Together, he confirmed. It was a simple word, but it was enough. It was the promise Alex needed to hear, the reassurance that they didn't have to have all the answers right now. They would figure it out, one step at a time. And that was all Alex could ask for. Ryan reached out, his fingers brushing gently against Alex's arm, and the simple touch sent a shiver down Alex's spine. He hadn't realized how much he craved that connection, how much he needed the quiet reassurance of Ryan's touch. It was grounding, steadying. And in that moment, Alex felt the weight of his fears lift just enough to let in the light. "We'll take it slow," Ryan said, his voice soft but steady. "No pressure. We don't have to define anything right now." Alex nodded, feeling the tension in his chest loosen. He wasn't used to letting himself be vulnerable, but with Ryan, it didn't feel as terrifying. It felt the room was bathed in the soft glow of morning light, and for the first time in a long time, Alex felt a sense of peace. There was still so much they had to figure out, but for now, it was enough to know that they were in this together. The future was uncertain, but they would face it side by side. Ryan's hand lingered on Alex's arm, his thumb brushing lightly against his skin in a way that was both comforting and electric. "You want to grab some coffee?" Ryan asked, a teasing glint in his eyes. "I hear caffeine helps with new beginnings." Alex couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising even himself. He hadn't realized how much he needed that release, how much the tension of the past few days had been weighing him down. "Yeah," Alex said, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I think I could use that." They moved together, the easy familiarity of their friendship still intact, but now colored with something new, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just about the kiss or the night they'd spent together. It was about the connection they had always had, the unspoken bond that had only grown stronger. As they made their way into the kitchen, Alex felt the first flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something he hadn't even known he needed. Maybe for the first time, he could let himself believe that this could work, that they could be more than just roommates, more than friends. As the scent of coffee filled the air and the morning light poured through the windows, Alex realized that this was their new beginning. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't always be easy, but it was theirs. And that was more than enough.